David Chin sat in the cramped studio apartment that smelled faintly of recycled air and yesterday's meal prep, the glow of his laptop screen casting shadows across his face. The Stanford hoodie he wore, picked up at a thrift store for $4.99, had a small hole near the left shoulder that he'd never bothered to fix. His fingers moved across the keyboard with practiced efficiency, lines of code scrolling past as he debugged a new feature for the literacy app he'd been building for a refugee organization. The Tupperware container beside him held chicken breast and brown rice, precisely portioned, the same meal he'd eaten for lunch every weekday for the past 3 months. His phone buzzed against the scratched surface of the desk. Emma's name appeared on the screen with a message that made his stomach tighten. "Mom's asking about money again. Can you?" David's jaw clenched as he opened his banking app. The balance displayed $847,293.16, a number that would have made most people's eyes widen. His finger hovered over the transfer button before he typed in the routing information for an account labeled E's Mom, Rent/Utilities. $4,500. He confirmed the transfer, then immediately moved to the next one. $50,000 to Emma's education fund. $25,000 to Refugee Children's Literacy Project. The balance dropped but remained comfortably in the 6 figures. He closed the app and stared at the wall, where a calendar hung with Emma's handwriting marking Oliver's pediatrician appointments and daycare schedule. 18 months old now. Growing so fast David sometimes felt he was watching a time-lapse video instead of living through real days. The apartment door opened and Emma stepped inside, her heels clicking against the worn laminate flooring. She wore the navy suit she always chose for client meetings, her hair pulled back in a way that made her look older than 32. Professional. Polished. The pharmaceutical sales job paid $85,000 a year, and she wore that salary like armor against her mother's judgment. "Did you?" Emma started, setting her bag down with more force than necessary. "Already done," David said. He kept his voice even, non-confrontational. They'd had this conversation enough times that the edges had been worn smooth by repetition. Emma's shoulders sagged. She moved to the kitchenette and poured herself a glass of water from the filtered pitcher, drinking it in long gulps. When she turned back to him, her eyes were red-rimmed. "I'm sorry. I know you work hard. I know it's fine." David stood and crossed to her, pulling her into an embrace. She smelled like expensive perfume, the kind her mother had convinced her to buy because presentation matters in pharmaceutical sales. He'd never told Emma that he could afford to buy her an entire store's worth of that perfume without noticing the dent in his account. "It's not fine," Emma whispered against his chest. "Mom calls every week. Every single week there's a new emergency. Her car payment. Her credit cards. The country club dues. I make decent money, David. I should be able to handle this, but it's like pouring water into a bucket with no bottom." David's hand moved in slow circles across her back. He thought about the transfer he'd just made, about the $275,000 he'd quietly funneled to Patricia Westbrook over the past 3 years. Emma had no idea. She thought the mysterious deposits in her mother's account came from some investment Emma's late father had set up, or maybe from Emma's own contributions. She'd never looked closely enough to realize the timeline didn't match. "Sometimes I wish she'd just have to figure it out herself," Emma said, pulling back to look at him. Her mascara had smudged slightly at the corners. "Is that terrible? To wish that about your own mother?" "It's human," David said. He brushed a strand of hair away from her face. "You're allowed to be tired, I can help more," he offered, knowing she'd refuse. "Let me, no." Emma's voice turned sharp. She stepped back, creating distance between them. "You already do enough. You work so hard, David. You give everything away. Half your income goes to charity. I won't let you sacrifice more for my mother's champagne taste. If she only knew, David thought. If she only knew that his work-from-home computer job had generated $800,000 last year alone. That Budget Zen, the app he'd built in this very apartment 3 years ago, now had 12 million active users. That he'd sold 60% of the company for $8.3 million and still retained equity that kept the money flowing in like a quiet river, but he didn't tell her. He never told anyone. He lived on $45,000 a year and let people assume he was scraping by. I love you, Emma said, softer now. She kissed him quickly, then moved toward the bedroom. I need to check on Oliver. He should be waking up from his nap soon. David listened to her footsteps fade, then returned to his laptop. The code blurred in front of him. He thought about Patricia Westbrook's luxury high-rise apartment, the one he paid for. About her Mercedes, her country club membership, her weekly salon appointments. About the Instagram account where she posted photos of her refined lifestyle to her 3,200 followers, carefully curating an image of success that existed entirely on the foundation of his anonymous support. His phone buzzed again. Marcus this time. Dinner tomorrow? Need to discuss something. David typed back a quick confirmation. Marcus Thompson had been his best friend since their freshman year at Stanford, back when David had actually attended classes in person instead of auditing them online. Marcus had gone on to become a family law attorney, while David had dropped out junior year to build Budget Zen. People had called him crazy. His parents had stopped speaking to him for 6 months. Now Marcus drove a sensible Toyota and lived in a modest 2-bedroom in the suburbs, while David drove a 2001 Honda Civic and lived in 400 square feet of barely renovated space. The irony wasn't lost on either of them. The weeks that followed had a texture of inevitability, like watching a car accident unfold in slow motion. Emma worked late more often, her stress manifesting in bitten fingernails and tension headaches. Patricia called every 3 days instead of weekly. The country club was threatening to revoke her membership over unpaid dues. Her credit cards were maxed out. The Mercedes needed new tires. David quietly increased the transfers. $5,000 for the club dues. $800 for the tires. $1,500 to cover the minimum payments on 3 different credit cards. He documented everything in a spreadsheet that no one else would ever see, each transaction a small weight added to a scale that was already tipping dangerously to one side. One evening in late October, David sat with Emma on their threadbare couch while Oliver played with wooden blocks on the floor. Rain hammered against the window, and the weather forecast was calling for storms throughout the weekend. Emma's phone rang, and David watched her face transform when she saw her mother's name on the screen. "Mom, I can't talk right now." "Oliver needs," Emma's voice cut off. Her expression shifted from exhaustion to alarm to something darker. "At Nordstrom?" "Mom, I told you last week that I couldn't." Another pause. "That's not fair. You know I'm doing everything I can." Her voice rose slightly, and Oliver looked up from his blocks, sensing the tension. "I can't keep doing this. I just can't." "We'll talk about this later." She ended the call and immediately stood, grabbing her keys from the counter. "I need to go out. Clear my head, Emma, it's pouring. I need to drive. I need to think." She was already moving toward the door, her movements jerky with frustration. "I'll be back in an hour." David wanted to stop her. Wanted to tell her to wait until the storm passed, until her anger had cooled. But Emma was already gone, the door closing behind her with a hollow thud that seemed to echo through the small apartment. He tried to return to his work, but the code refused to cooperate. Oliver babbled something that might have been Mama and reached for his favorite stuffed elephant. David picked him up, settled him on his lap, and opened a picture book about construction vehicles. They made it through 3 pages before his phone rang, Marcus's number. At 11:47 on a Thursday night, David. Marcus's voice had the careful, measured tone he used in court. I need you to sit down. I'm sitting. Where's Oliver? David looked down at his son, who was chewing on the corner of the board book. Right here. Why, keep him close. Marcus took a breath, and in that pause, David felt the world begin to tilt. There's been an accident. Emma's car. A semi-truck ran a red light at the intersection of 5th and Morrison. David, I'm so sorry. She didn't make it. The words landed like physical blows. David heard them, understood them on some intellectual level, but his body refused to accept the information. Oliver looked up at him, sensing something wrong, his lower lip beginning to tremble. No, David said. It was the only word he could form. No, that's not, she just left. She was just here. She's coming back, I'm on my way over, Marcus said. Don't do anything. Don't go anywhere. Just stay with Oliver. I'll be there in 15 minutes, the call ended. David sat frozen on the couch, Oliver in his lap, the picture book open to a page showing a yellow bulldozer. Rain continued to hammer the window. The apartment felt simultaneously too small and impossibly vast, like he was viewing it through the wrong end of a telescope. Oliver reached up and patted David's face. Dada? That single word broke something loose inside him. David pulled his son close, buried his face in his hair, and let the first wave of grief crash over him like the storm outside. The next 2 weeks existed in a fog. Marcus moved into the apartment, sleeping on the couch, handling phone calls and paperwork and all the administrative minutiae that death demanded. David functioned on autopilot, changing diapers, preparing bottles, reading the same 3 board books over and over while his mind refused to fully engage with reality. Oliver cried for his mama, and David held him and wept with him, 2 people drowning in a loss they couldn't articulate. Patricia arrived the day after Emma died. Sweeping into the apartment in designer black and expensive perfume. She'd taken over immediately, making phone calls, arranging the funeral, overruling David's every suggestion with the absolute certainty of someone who believed grief gave her authority. Emma deserves elegance, Patricia announced when David suggested a simple service at the community center where he'd met Emma 5 years ago. She was my daughter. She'll be remembered properly. The funeral was held at the country club Patricia couldn't afford, with white doves and a string quartet and catering that cost more than David's monthly rent. Patricia held court like a widow herself, accepting condolences with practiced grace while David sat in the back row. Oliver on his lap, feeling like an intruder at his own wife's memorial. When it came time for eulogies, Patricia gestured for David to speak. He walked to the front on legs that felt disconnected from his body. No prepared remarks. No carefully crafted speech. Just truth. Emma sang off-key, he started, his voice cracking. Every morning when she was making coffee, she'd sing whatever song was stuck in her head, and she was always half a note flat. She volunteered at the food bank every other Saturday but never told anyone about it. She read romance novels and cried at the endings even when they were happy. She was trying so hard to be good enough for everyone that she forgot she already was. He looked out at the assembled crowd, Patricia's book club friends in their funeral blacks, Emma's pharmaceutical colleagues, distant relatives who'd emerged from wherever distant relatives hide. None of them had known her. Not really. Emma taught me that love isn't about what you can buy someone, David continued. It's about showing up. Being present. Choosing them every single day. His voice broke completely. I chose her. I wish I'd had more days to keep choosing her. The room was silent except for muffled crying. Even Patricia wiped her eyes, though she recovered quickly, but afterward, at the reception, Patricia's mask slipped back into place. She held Oliver possessively, showing him off to Margaret and Diane and Susan and Candace, her book club friends who wore their wealth like uniforms. When David reached for his son, Patricia pulled away with a practiced smile that didn't reach her eyes. He needs stability right now, David. Not your uncertainty. The words felt like a warning shot. David felt ice spread through his stomach, but he was too numb, too destroyed to fully process the threat. He watched Patricia carry Oliver to the other side of the room, watched her friends fawn over the baby like he was a prize to be won. Marcus appeared at his elbow. We need to talk. Soon. About what? About custody. About Patricia. About the fact that she's already planning something. Marcus kept his voice low. I know you're grieving, but you need to start paying attention. She's positioning herself. David wanted to argue, but the exhaustion was too heavy. He nodded mutely and let Marcus guide him to a quiet corner. 2 weeks later, Patricia invited David to her apartment to discuss Oliver's future. The phrasing alone should have warned him, but he was still operating in that fog, still functioning on autopilot. He arrived at her luxury high-rise, the one he paid for, though she didn't know that, and found her sitting at her dining table with papers spread out like evidence in a trial. Margaret, Diane, Susan, and Candace sat in the adjacent living room. Silent witnesses arranged like a jury. David. Patricia gestured to the chair across from her. I'm glad you came. We need to talk about practical arrangements. He sat, every instinct screaming that this was wrong, but his grief-dulled reflexes couldn't catch up fast enough. I've thought carefully about this, Patricia continued. Her voice had the smooth, reasonable tone of someone who'd rehearsed this speech. Emma would want Oliver raised with advantages. Culture. Education. Stability. I think it's best if he stays with me for a while. Just until you get back on your feet financially. The fog lifted slightly. He's my son. He stays with me. Patricia's smile turned venomous. Of course he's your son. I'm just talking about what's best for him. You work from home in that tiny apartment. I have space. Resources. Time. I've already converted Emma's old room into a nursery. The words registered slowly. Already converted. Already made decisions. Already moved forward with plans that excluded him. I've been documenting your financial situation, Patricia continued, and now her book club friends leaned forward slightly, a chorus preparing to sing. Your income is unstable. Your living conditions are inadequate. Emma was always worried about money. She told me as much. David's hands clenched into fists under the table. Emma had worried about money because she was trying to fund her mother's lifestyle. Because Patricia's champagne taste had bled them both dry. But he couldn't say that. Not yet. Bring Oliver home, he said quietly. Steel crept into his voice despite the exhaustion. Now. Patricia's expression hardened. Let's not be hasty. Oliver needs consistency. He's my son. David stood, the chair scraping against expensive hardwood. Bring him to me by 6 p.m. or I'm calling the police. Fine. Patricia's voice dripped with false sweetness. But don't say I didn't warn you. David left the apartment feeling like he'd just lost a battle he hadn't known he was fighting. He called Marcus from the lobby, his hands shaking. She's going to take him, David said. She's already planning it. I know, Marcus replied. Meet me at my office. We're filing emergency custody papers first thing tomorrow. And David? Start documenting everything. Every conversation. Every interaction. Everything. David returned to his apartment that evening expecting to find Oliver's things packed and ready. Instead, he found nothing. The crib was gone. The changing table. The toys. The clothes. Every trace of his son had been erased from the apartment, like Oliver had never existed at all. His heart hammered against his ribs. He called Patricia. No answer. He called again. Again. 5 times before he gave up and drove to her building. The doorman, the same one who'd greeted him pleasantly dozens of times before, blocked his path to the elevators. "I'm sorry, sir. Ms. Westbrook said she's not receiving visitors." "Especially not you. That's my son up there," David said. His voice rose. "She has my son." "Let me up." "I can't do that, sir. I'm going to have to ask you to leave, or I'll call security." David wanted to push past him. Wanted to rage and fight and force his way upstairs. But he was 34 years old and well past the age where physical violence solved anything. He turned and walked back to his car, his vision blurring. He called Marcus again. "She took everything. She won't let me see him. The doorman won't let me up." "Don't do anything rash," Marcus said immediately. "No matter how much you want to. Meet me at my office. We file papers tomorrow morning, first thing." "This is kidnapping, David. We'll get Oliver back." "But you need to stay calm." David drove home and sat in the empty apartment staring at the space where Oliver's crib had been. His laptop sat on the desk, screen dark. He opened it and pulled up the transfer history, 3 years of payments, hundreds of thousands of dollars, all flowing to the woman who'd just stolen his son. He thought about Emma. About her last words to him before she'd driven out into that storm. "I can't keep doing this." His hand moved to the desk drawer where he'd stored Emma's letter, the one the hospital had found in her bag, sealed in an envelope with his name written in her careful handwriting. He'd been too afraid to open it, too terrified of what her last words might reveal. Now, with Oliver gone and his apartment emptied and his grief threatening to consume him completely, David broke the seal and unfolded the paper. Emma's handwriting blurred through his tears, but he forced himself to read every word. About how he was the best man she'd ever known. About how Patricia would try to take Oliver, would see him as a trophy. About how David needed to stop giving her mother money, needed to let Patricia stand on her own feet. About how he should move on, fall in love again, be happy. The letter ended with 3 words that broke him completely: "I love you." David sat alone in the empty apartment. Emma's final message clutched in his hands, and made a decision. Patricia wanted to play games about stability and resources, and who could provide the best life for Oliver. She wanted to use his modest lifestyle as a weapon against him. Fine. He'd let her think she'd won. He'd let her believe he was the struggling work-from-home developer she'd always assumed he was. And then, when the moment was right, he'd show her exactly how wrong she'd been about everything. He opened his laptop and began typing an email to his accountant. The subject line read, "Regarding financial documentation for custody proceedings." His fingers flew across the keyboard, laying groundwork for a war Patricia Westbrook didn't even know was coming. Outside, rain began to fall again, drumming against the window like a countdown to something inevitable. Marcus filed the emergency custody papers on a Tuesday morning, the kind of gray autumn day when the sky pressed down like a lid. David sat in the lawyer's office, watching Marcus's fingers fly across the holographic interface, legal documents blooming in the air between them like toxic flowers. The family court system, Marcus explained, moved with the speed of continental drift. 6 weeks minimum before a hearing. Maybe 8, David's hands tightened on the armrests. 8 weeks of Oliver calling Patricia's apartment home. 8 weeks of his son forgetting the sound of his voice. "We'll get temporary visitation," Marcus said, swiping through precedents. "Supervised, probably. Twice a week standard, supervised." The word tasted like rust. The agreement came through 3 days later. Twice weekly, 2 hours each session, at Patricia's residence. David read the terms on his cracked phone screen while sitting in his car outside the building where Emma used to live. Where their son now lived without him. The steering wheel was older than most of the law clerks who'd processed his case, the vinyl worn smooth by his palms. He climbed the stairs to the third floor. Patricia answered the door in athleisure that cost more than his monthly groceries, her smile sharp as surgical steel. "Right on time," she said, stepping aside just enough that he had to turn sideways to enter. "Oliver's in the nursery, the nursery." Emma's childhood bedroom, now painted in shades of cream and gold that matched Patricia's aesthetic, not Emma's memory. David stood in the doorway, looking at the custom furniture, the designer mobile, the photographs of Patricia holding Oliver arranged like a gallery wall. Emma appeared in exactly one frame, tucked in the corner, almost an afterthought. Oliver sat on a plush rug, surrounded by toys still in their packaging. When he saw David, his face lit up with pure, uncomplicated joy. "Dada." David crossed the room in 3 strides, scooped his son into his arms. Buried his face in the soft spot where Oliver's neck met his shoulder. The baby smelled like expensive lotion, not the lavender soap Emma had always used. Everything was different. Everything was wrong. "I'll be in the living room," Patricia said from the doorway. "If you need anything, supervising." She meant supervising. The next 2 hours crawled by like wounded animals. David read board books he'd brought from home, stacked blocks, made Oliver giggle with silly faces. Every time the baby laughed, David felt something crack inside his chest. Every time he checked his phone and saw the minutes counting down, the crack widened. When the timer on his phone finally chimed, Oliver was playing with a toy truck, making engine noises. David knelt beside him, ran his hand over his son's hair. "Daddy has to go, buddy." Oliver looked up, confused. "Go, just for a little while." "I'll be back soon." "No." Oliver's lower lip trembled. "Dada, stay." David pulled him close, felt the small body stiffen and then collapse into sobs. Patricia appeared in the doorway, arms crossed, watching. No sympathy in her face. No acknowledgement of the violence being done. "Time's up, David." He extracted himself from Oliver's grip, each finger that unclenched from his shirt a small agony. Patricia picked up the crying child, patted his back with mechanical efficiency. "He'll calm down," she said. "Children are resilient." David left without answering, afraid of what he might say. Behind him, Oliver's wails echoed down the hallway. This happened twice a week. Tuesday and Thursday, 2 to 4 p.m., regular as a prison sentence. On the 4th visit, Oliver toddled over to David carrying something soft and faded. Emma's old baby blanket, the one her grandmother had crocheted, the one Patricia had threatened to throw away a dozen times. Oliver held it out like an offering. "Mama?" he asked, his voice small and confused. The question hit David like a fist. Oliver was too young to understand death, too young to know why the woman who'd nursed him and sung to him and rocked him to sleep had simply vanished. He just knew she was gone. David sat on the floor, pulled Oliver into his lap, wrapped them both in the blanket that still smelled faintly of Emma's perfume. "Mama loved you so much," he whispered into his son's hair. "So much, buddy. And Daddy's going to make sure you never forget her." "I promise." Oliver relaxed against him, thumb in his mouth, secure in the moment even if nothing else made sense. From the doorway, Patricia watched. David met her eyes over his son's head, saw something flicker across her face. Not guilt. Not quite. Something harder to name. Resentment, maybe. That David got to be the devoted father, the tragic hero, while she was cast as the practical villain. She looked away first. The money disappeared on a Wednesday in late October. Patricia was at the salon, pretending she could still afford the premium highlighting package, when her credit card declined. She tried another. Same result. At the grocery store that afternoon, her debit card bounced. Her car payment notification glowed red on her phone. The country club sent a certified letter about 3 months of unpaid dues. She sat in her apartment, Emma's apartment, the lease still in Emma's name for another 8 months, and opened her banking app with shaking hands. The mysterious deposits that had appeared like clockwork for 3 years, the ones she'd convinced herself were dividends from investments Emma had made on her behalf, were gone. The account showed nothing but her own meager contributions and a balance that wouldn't cover next month's rent. Patricia called Emma's bank first. They couldn't discuss account details with non-authorized users. She called the tech company Emma had worked for, asked about life insurance, death benefits, anything. The HR representative was sympathetic but firm. All benefits had been paid to the named beneficiary. David, Emma's friends, were her last resort. She called Rachel first, then Melissa, then Claire. No one knew about regular transfers. No one knew about any financial arrangements. Patricia's mind spiraled down dark corridors. Had Emma been embezzling? Dealing drugs? How else could she have been supporting her mother so completely? She called David at 6 p.m., her voice tight with false casualness. "David, I need to ask you something about Emma's finances." Silence on the line, cold as space. "Did she have any accounts I don't know about? Any automatic payments set up? Why?" His voice could have frozen nitrogen. "I'm just trying to sort out her affairs. Her affairs are none of your concern. She left everything to me." Patricia's grip tightened on the phone. "I'm her mother, and I'm Oliver's father. But you don't seem to think that matters." The line went dead. Patricia stared at her phone, rage and panic warring in her chest. She threw it across the room, watched it crack against the wall. Felt a savage satisfaction that lasted exactly as long as it took to remember she couldn't afford to replace it. The book club met the following Tuesday. Patricia had maxed out 2 credit cards catering an elaborate brunch, desperate to maintain the fiction that everything was fine. Margaret arrived first in her self-driving Tesla, then Diane in her hydrogen sedan, then Susan and Candace together, their designer bags genuine, their concern performative. They settled around Patricia's dining table, Emma's dining table, with mimosas in crystal flutes Patricia had bought for Emma's wedding. The book they were supposed to discuss sat unopened on the credenza. "How are you holding up?" Margaret asked. Her sympathy as genuine as her Botox. "It's been difficult," Patricia said, which was true. "But Oliver needs stability. Have you thought about formalizing custody?" Diane leaned forward, hungry for details. "You're so much better equipped to raise him properly." Patricia felt something shift in her chest. Permission. Validation. "David seems nice," Susan offered, "but he's clearly not equipped for a child." "That apartment, does he even have a stable income?" Candace asked, her voice sharp with judgment. "Emma never talked about his work. He does something with computers," Patricia said. "Works from home. Very modest lifestyle, modest or broke?" Candace pressed. "Because if he can't provide." The idea crystallized in Patricia's mind like ice forming on a window. Terrible. Entitled. Desperate. Perfect. She spent the next 3 days drafting the document. Child Care Services Agreement, she titled it, making it sound professional, legitimate. She itemized everything: housing, feeding, clothing, educational enrichment, supervisory presence. $42,000 in retroactive fees. $5,000 per visit going forward, minimum 2 visits monthly to maintain parental rights. She read it over a dozen times, each reading making it seem more reasonable. She was investing time, money, energy into raising Emma's son. David should contribute proportionally. It was only fair. It was practical. It was what responsible adults did. She scheduled a celebration of life event at the country club, 6 weeks after the funeral. Sent formal invitations. Made it sound like a memorial, like a chance to honor Emma's memory, when really it was a stage. A performance. A power play. David received the invitation on embossed cardstock, delivered by messenger. He stood in his apartment, turning it over in his hands, reading the elegant script. Marcus was there, reviewing discovery documents on the coffee table. "Don't go," Marcus said. "It's a trap, I have to go," David replied. "She has my son, then we document everything. Whatever she's planning, we need witnesses." David told Jade about the event when she stopped by that evening with groceries. She'd been doing that lately, appearing at his door with bags of food she claimed were extras, sitting with him in the quiet hours when grief was loudest. She found him that night staring at photographs of Emma spread across the floor, dark circles carved into the skin under his eyes. She didn't say anything at first, just set the groceries on the counter and sat beside him on the floor. "Emma told me once," Jade said quietly, picking up a photo of Emma laughing at their wedding, "that you were the only person who ever loved her without wanting to change her." "That's rare, David." David's voice was hollow, scraped clean of everything but pain. "I wish I'd loved her louder. Made her feel like she didn't have to please everyone else." Jade turned to look at him. They were close, closer than they'd been before, their faces inches apart in the dim light of his living room. "She knew," Jade said. "Trust me," she knew. Something electric moved in the space between them. David felt it like static before a storm, dangerous and thrilling and wrong. He pulled back, broke eye contact, pressed his palms against his knees. "I can't," he said. "It's too soon." I know." Jade stood, brushed invisible dust from her jeans. "I'm not asking for anything. I just want you to know, you're not alone in this." She left before he could respond. David stayed on the floor, surrounded by photographs of his dead wife. Feeling something besides grief for the first time in 6 weeks. It terrified him more than anything Patricia could do. Marcus arrived at David's apartment the morning of the brunch with a leather briefcase and a grim expression. He'd been building their case methodically, financial records, text messages, documentation of every denied visit, every manipulative phone call, every time Patricia had wielded Oliver like a weapon. "Stay calm," Marcus said, laying out their strategy. "Let her make the mistakes. Let her show everyone who she really is." David dressed in his usual thrift store blazer, the one Emma had loved because it reminded her that he didn't care about appearances. He drove his 2001 Honda through the affluent streets where Patricia's country club presided over manicured lawns and forced leisure. He parked next to Patricia's Mercedes, which was 3 payments from repossession, though he was the only one who knew that. The club's private dining room gleamed with old money and new technology. Smart glass walls showed curated views of gardens that didn't exist. Holographic place cards floated above each seat. 20 guests mingled with champagne and judgment, most of them Patricia's friends, a few of Emma's old colleagues, Jade looking uncomfortable in a sundress, Marcus posing as David's supportive friend. Patricia held court at the head of the table with Oliver on her lap. Dressed in designer children's clothes, displayed like a trophy. David was seated at the far end, deliberately isolated, deliberately othered. Patricia stood, raising her glass. To Emma, a woman who embodied grace, success, and ambition. "Who gave us this precious gift?" She kissed Oliver's head. "And who would want us to ensure he has the best possible future?" The table murmured agreement. David said nothing, watching, waiting, his hand resting on the pocket where Emma's letter waited. Margaret turned to him, her smile predatory. "David, what exactly is it you do?" Emma was always so vague. "Software development." "Oh, like building websites?" Diane asked, as if the question were genuine. "Among other things." Patricia laughed, the sound light and cruel. "David's very humble about his work. He prefers to keep things small scale. Intimate projects. Nothing too ambitious, Susan leaned forward. I heard you drive a Honda from the Clinton administration. Is that true? 2001, David said calmly. The Bush administration, actually. Laughter rippled around the table. David took a sip of water, his expression unchanged. And you live in that studio near the university? Candace pressed. Emma mentioned it was cozy. Minimalism is very trendy right now, Patricia said sweetly. David's committed to the aesthetic. Though I imagine it's challenging with a toddler. All those toys, the mess. Not much space for a crib and a home office, Mom. Jade's voice was quiet but sharp. Stop, I'm just making conversation, sweetheart. Rachel, one of Emma's real friends, spoke up. I think it's lovely that David lives simply. Emma always said he was the most generous person she knew. She said he gave away almost everything he made. Patricia's smile tightened at the edges. Yes, well, charity is admirable. But a child needs stability, not just good intentions. Oliver has stability, David said. He has a father who loves him, of course you love him. Patricia's voice dripped with false reasonableness. That's not in question. But love doesn't pay for private school. Love doesn't provide the opportunities Emma would have wanted for him. Marcus set down his fork with deliberate care. Speaking of opportunities, David, didn't you mention Oliver's education fund? The one you've been contributing to since he was born. I have, David said. It's at $170,000 now. The conversation stopped like a record scratch. Patricia's smile faltered, her grip on Oliver tightening. That's wonderful, she managed. Though of course, day-to-day expenses, you put aside $170,000 on a software developer's salary? Margaret's voice had lost its condescension, replaced by confused calculation. I live below my means. Patricia felt control slipping through her fingers like water. She reached for the leather portfolio beside her plate, slid it across the table toward David. Inside, embossed and official-looking, the invoice. David, I think we need to be practical. I've been providing full-time care for Oliver for 6 weeks now. Housing, food, clothing, enrichment activities, medical expenses, it adds up. I've calculated fair compensation for these services. David opened the portfolio. Read in silence. The table craned forward, everyone trying to see. Rachel broke first. Patricia, is that a bill? You're billing him for seeing his own son? It's not a bill, Patricia said, defensive now. Her voice rising. It's a formalization of expenses. I think $5,000 per visit is reasonable given the level of care, Mom. Jade's voice cut through the room. What the hell, don't use that language with me. I'm trying to ensure Oliver has the life he deserves. David can't provide that on his own, and someone has to think practically. You're right, David said quietly. Everyone stopped. Patricia looked at him, confused, hopeful. You're absolutely right, David continued. Someone does have to think practically. He pulled out his phone. The ancient, cracked-screen phone that had been the subject of jokes minutes earlier. He tapped the screen, navigated to his banking app. Held it up so the people nearest him could see. For the past 3 years, David said, his voice calm and cold as deep space, I've been sending monthly payments to an account. Emma set it up. She was embarrassed that her mother was drowning in debt, so she asked me to help. Anonymously, the color drained from Patricia's face like someone had opened a valve. David turned the phone, let the table see the transaction history. Rent and utilities. $4,500 a month for 36 months. That's $162,000. Car payment. $850 monthly. $30,600 total. Credit card minimum payments. $1,200 monthly. $43,200. Country club dues. $600 monthly. 21,600. Miscellaneous expenses. 500 monthly. 18,000. He looked up at Patricia. Total, $275,400 over 3 years. The room exploded into noise. Margaret's voice rose above the chaos. You've been paying for everything, Patricia. You told us Emma was supporting you. Susan's accusation hung in the air like smoke. I didn't know, Patricia said, her voice breaking. Emma never told me. She didn't want you to know, David said. She thought it would humiliate you. He tapped his phone again. Cancelled every automatic payment. One by one, each cancellation appearing on the screen like a small death. But I'm done now. Emma's gone. And apparently I need to save that $5,000 per month for your visitation fees. He stood. The chair scraped against the floor, loud in the sudden silence. I'll pick up Oliver tomorrow at 9 a.m. Pack his things, David. Wait, Patricia's voice cracked with panic. If you take him, she said, louder now, desperate, I'll file for emergency custody. I'll tell the court you're unstable, that you can't provide for him, that you're living in squalor. Marcus stood, pulling documents from his briefcase with theatrical precision. You'll tell the court that David, who makes over $800,000 annually, can't provide. That he's unstable, despite having no criminal record, no history of violence, and multiple character witnesses? He laid the papers on the table like accusations. You'll tell them that you, who are currently $87,000 in debt and about to lose your apartment, are the better option. Patricia's face crumbled. Or, Marcus continued, and hear me out, you'll sign these joint custody papers, giving David primary physical custody with generous visitation for you, and we'll forget this conversation ever happened. Wait. Diane's voice was sharp with realization. 800,000? What do you do? Jade had her phone out, scrolling frantically. Mom, she said, her voice strange. Oh my God, Mom, she turned the phone around. An article from 3 years prior, anonymous creator of Budget Zen app revealed, David Chen donates millions to charity. The room exploded again, louder this time. You're that David Chen? Jade stared at him. The Budget Zen guy? David looked uncomfortable, trapped. I prefer not to make a big deal, my entire office uses that app. Rachel said. It has 12 million users. Margaret turned to Patricia, her voice acidic. You tried to extort a millionaire? I didn't know, Patricia whispered. I swear I didn't know. David reached into his jacket, pulled out the envelope. Emma's handwriting on the front, his name in her careful script. He opened it with steady hands, unfolded the letter, began to read aloud. His voice shook but didn't break. David, if you're reading this, something happened to me. First, I love you more than anything except Oliver. You're the best man I've ever known. Second, stop giving Mom money. Let her figure it out. She'll never respect what she didn't earn. She'll never learn. Patricia made a sound like something wounded. And third, don't you dare let her keep our son from you. You're a wonderful father. Oliver needs your values, not her price tags. She'll try to make you doubt yourself. Don't let her. He paused, his voice dropping. Also, move on when you're ready. Fall in love again. Be happy. Oliver needs to see his father live, not just survive. I love you both so much. Emma, the silence was absolute. Patricia was crying. Candace was crying. Even Marcus looked moved, his professional mask slipping. David folded the letter carefully, put it back in his pocket. He walked to Patricia, held out his arms. She looked at him, then at Oliver, then back at him. Slowly, she transferred the baby into his father's arms. Dada, Oliver said, patting David's cheek. David's eyes were wet but his voice was steady. Emma loved you. Despite everything, she loved you. That's why she protected your pride. That's why she never told you where the money came from. But I won't betray her memory by letting you take my son." He turned to leave. Marcus gathered his papers. The room watched in silence. Wait, everyone turned. Jade was standing, her hands clenched at her sides, her face flushed. "Mom," she said. "Sit down before you embarrass yourself more than you already have." "Jade, no. Shut up. For once in your life, just shut up and listen." She turned to David. Her voice shook but her eyes were clear. "I knew something was up. Emma got drunk at Christmas 2 years ago and told me you made stupid money but lived like a monk because you were pathologically allergic to capitalism." "I thought she was exaggerating." "She wasn't," David said. "I googled you last night. Took me 45 minutes because apparently you've scrubbed yourself from most of the internet, but I found you. The budget Zen thing. The charity donations. The articles about anonymous tech philanthropists. I don't like attention." Jade smiled, slow and dangerous. "I know. That's why I've had a crush on you since Emma's wedding." The table gasped. Patricia looked horrified. "But you were devoted to my sister, and she was my sister, so I kept my mouth shut. And then she died, and I thought, well, that's that. I'll just be Aunt Jade and quietly pine from a distance." She took a breath. "But you're single now. You're a great father. You shop at Goodwill. You drive a car held together by duct tape and prayers. You don't care about status or money or any of the things my mother sold her soul for." She glanced at Patricia. "And I'm nothing like her. I'm a teacher. I make $42,000 a year. I have student loans. My car is somehow worse than yours. I've never been to a country club, and I think this brunch is obscene." Marcus leaned toward Rachel. "Is this happening? So here's my offer," Jade continued. "You get full custody of Oliver. I help with babysitting because I actually love that kid and have since the day he was born. And in 6 months, after you've grieved properly, after you've healed, you let me take you to the world's cheapest dinner. Taco Tuesday. Dollar tacos. We'll go Dutch." David stared at her. A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth, the first real smile since Emma died. "That's possibly the worst timing for flirting in human history, I know. But I'm also Oliver's aunt. And unlike some people," she looked pointedly at her mother, "I'd never charge you to see your own kid. So. What do you say?" David looked at this woman, this fierce, honest, unpretentious woman who'd just publicly eviscerated her own mother to defend him. Who dressed like him, thought like him, valued what he valued. Who looked nothing like Emma but somehow reminded him of all the best parts of her. 6 months, he said, 6 months. She agreed. Taco Tuesday, the cheapest tacos in the city, deal. Jade crossed to him, stood close but not too close. She reached out, touched Oliver's hand gently. "Hey, buddy. Aunt Jade's gonna make sure your dad gets you home, okay?" Oliver gurgled happily, grabbed her finger. Jade looked up at David. Their eyes met. Something passed between them, grief and hope and possibility, all tangled together in the space where loss met future. 6 months, she whispered. 6 months, he said. David walked out of the country club with Oliver in his arms, Marcus on one side, Jade on the other. Behind them, Patricia sat alone at the table, surrounded by her judgmental friends. The unpaid invoice sitting in front of her like an indictment. The holographic place cards flickered and died. The smart glass showed only the truth, a parking lot, empty of everything but consequences. Patricia's phone buzzed. A text from her landlord. An eviction notice. Reality, finally, crashing down. David carried Oliver through the apartment door and set him down gently on the worn carpet. The space felt wrong without Emma's presence filling it, her voice echoing off the walls, her laughter making the cramped rooms feel bigger. Now it was just quiet. Just them. Oliver toddled toward his toy basket, seemingly unbothered by the transition, and David felt a spike of irrational jealousy toward childhood resilience. The buzzer rang 20 minutes later. Jade stood in the hallway with 2 boxes of Oliver's things, her hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, no makeup, wearing the same thrift store aesthetic that had become their shared language. "Where do you want these?" she asked. David gestured to the corner where Emma had set up the small nursery area. Jade set the boxes down carefully, then stood there, hands in her pockets, not quite leaving but not imposing either. "Do you need anything?" she asked. David looked around the apartment, at Oliver playing quietly, at the boxes of his son's life that had been held hostage for weeks. "No. Thank you, okay." Jade pulled out her phone, typed quickly. "Just sent you my number. I'm a phone call away. Anytime." 3 a.m., doesn't matter, she left before he could respond. David watched her go, feeling that magnetic pull again, the one that terrified him because it felt like betraying Emma even though Emma's own letter had given him permission. The door clicked shut. Oliver made a car noise with his mouth. Life continued its forward momentum whether David was ready or not. Marcus called 2 days later with news delivered in his characteristic monotone. Patricia had signed the joint custody agreement without modifications. Every other weekend, alternating holidays, full access contingent on respectful behavior. She'd signed it in a motel room. Marcus said, because her apartment had been foreclosed the day before, her car was repossessed yesterday afternoon, Marcus added. Country club dropped her membership. I'm told her book club friends have gone radio silent. David felt something twist in his chest. Not quite sympathy. Not quite satisfaction. Something more complicated that tasted like ash. She gets Oliver this Saturday, Marcus continued. 9 a.m. to Sunday at 6. You okay with that? Yeah, David said, though he wasn't sure. Emma would want him to know his grandmother. Emma's not here to want anything anymore, I know. But I am. Marcus made a noise that might have been approval or resignation. The line went quiet for a moment. You're a better man than I'd be, he finally said, then hung up. Patricia showed up Saturday morning at exactly 9, driving a rusted sedan that looked like it had been borrowed from someone's sympathetic neighbor. She stood at his door in clothes from Target, her face bare of the armor she used to wear, dark circles carved beneath her eyes like she hadn't slept in weeks. I'll have him back by 6 tomorrow, she said, her voice small. David handed over Oliver's overnight bag, watched his son reach for his grandmother without hesitation. Kids forgave so easily. It was a superpower adults lost somewhere along the way. Patricia, he said as she turned to leave. She looked back, braced for judgment. There's a park 3 blocks north. Oliver likes the swings, her eyes filled. She nodded. They left. David stood in his empty apartment for 10 minutes, listening to the silence, before calling Jade. Want to get coffee? He asked. Thought you'd never ask. They met at a place near the university where the coffee was terrible but cheap and the students too absorbed in their own drama to care about anyone else. Jade ordered black coffee. David got the same. They sat at a wobbly table by the window. How are you doing? Jade asked. Real answer. David watched people pass on the street, their augmented reality glasses lighting up with social feeds and status updates he'd designed algorithms to track. The future had made it easier to curate lives and harder to live them. I don't know, he said. Emma's gone. Patricia's broken. I'm raising a toddler alone. But I also feel, he stopped, unsure how to finish, lighter? Jade offered, yeah. And that makes me feel guilty. Emma wouldn't want you to feel guilty. How do you know what Emma would want? Jade's eyes flashed. Because she was my sister for 29 years before she was your wife for 5. I knew her. I knew what she valued. And she valued you being happy more than she valued you being a martyr to her memory. David looked at her. Really looked. Jade met his stare without flinching. Sorry, she said. Too much? No. Exactly enough. They sat there for another hour, talking about nothing important, everything important. When they finally left, David's chest felt less tight than it had in weeks. 3 weeks later, Patricia called him. Her voice was steadier but still fragile, like glass that had been glued back together. Can we meet? She asked. There's a coffee shop on 5th. Tomorrow at 2? David almost said no. Marcus would have said no. But Emma's voice in his head, the one from the letter, kept repeating, she loved you. Okay. He arrived first, ordered water, sat at a corner table. Patricia came in 10 minutes late, breathless, her hair windblown from walking. No Mercedes. No driver. Just her, carrying a second-hand purse and wearing discount store shoes. She sat down without ordering anything. You have every right to hate me, she said immediately. David leaned back. I don't hate you. I'm angry. But Emma loved you. Oliver deserves to know his grandmother. Not the Instagram version. The real one. I don't know who that is anymore. Then figure it out. He slid an envelope across the table. Patricia stared at it like it might explode. Open it. Inside were 3 things. Keys to a 1-bedroom apartment in a modest neighborhood. A job offer letter for social media manager at the David Chin Foundation. Salary $40,000 annually. A syllabus for a financial literacy course with her name already enrolled. Patricia's hands shook. Why? After everything I did, because Emma asked me to take care of you. Not enable you. Take care of you. There's a difference. I don't deserve this. No, David agreed. But Emma deserves for her mother to be in her son's life. And Oliver deserves to have a grandmother who's present, not performed. Patricia was crying now, silent tears tracking through the space where foundation used to hide her real face. David leaned forward, his voice firm. But this is contingent. You work the job. You take the course. You show up for Oliver without expectations. And you rebuild trust, slowly. If you mess up, if you try to manipulate, if you prioritize appearances over substance, I'm done. Understand? Yes. One more thing. You owe Jade an apology. A real one. She defended me at her own expense. She lost her relationship with you to protect Oliver's relationship with me. Patricia nodded, wiping her eyes with a paper napkin. I know. I'll call her tonight. Don't call. Go see her. Face to face, okay. They sat there for a moment longer, the coffee shop humming with conversations around them, people living their small dramas, unaware that forgiveness could happen in unremarkable places on unremarkable afternoons. Thank you, Patricia whispered. David stood. Don't thank me. Just do better. He left her there with the envelope, the keys, the possibility of redemption. Whether she'd take it or squander it wasn't his responsibility anymore. 3 months passed like frames in a film, each one showing incremental change. Patricia worked at the foundation office, managing social media accounts that showcased real charitable work instead of curated luxury. She posted photos of volunteers, donation drives, community programs. The comments were mostly positive. Her follower count grew slowly, organically, people drawn to authenticity instead of aspiration. She attended the financial literacy course twice a week, sitting in a room with other people rebuilding their lives. Learning about credit and budgeting and the difference between needs and wants. She visited Oliver every other weekend, playing on the floor of David's apartment, reading picture books, being present instead of performing. She had coffee with Jade once a week, apologizing genuinely, asking about her sister's life for the first time in years. The book club friends disappeared entirely. In their place came co-workers from the foundation, fellow students from the course, people who knew her current self instead of her fabricated past. On a Saturday afternoon in early spring, Patricia posted a photo on Instagram. Her first personal post in months. It showed her and Oliver at a public park. Both covered in ice cream, both laughing. No filter. No designer clothes. No carefully constructed caption about gratitude while really signaling wealth, just learning that the best things in life aren't things. Grateful for second chances, the comments flooded in. Some mocking, some cruel, people who remembered the country club scandal. But most were supportive. People who'd watched her fall and were rooting for her to rebuild. Her follower count ticked upward. 87,000 by the end of the week. She read every comment, smiled at the kind ones, ignored the cruel ones, then closed the app and went to babysit Oliver. The validation didn't matter anymore. The numbers were just numbers. David and Jade circled each other for those same 3 months like planets caught in each other's gravity, pulled close but never quite colliding. She babysat Oliver twice a week, arriving with groceries she claimed were extra from her shopping, staying for dinner, leaving before the hour got late enough to mean something. They had coffee dates that neither called dates. She helped him redecorate the apartment, boxing Emma's things respectfully, not erasing her but making space for the future to have room to grow. They worked together in comfortable silence, occasionally broken by conversation that felt easy in a way David hadn't expected to feel again. In the 10th week, Jade came over for pizza and cartoons with Oliver. After the baby fell asleep, they cleaned up together, moving around the small kitchen in a practiced rhythm. Their hands touched, reaching for the same plate. They both froze. I think about her every day, David said quietly, not moving his hand. I know. I don't know if I'm ready, you don't have to be. Not yet, but neither of them moved apart. They stood there with their hands touching over a greasy plate, breathing in sync, the only sound the hum of the refrigerator and distant traffic through the window. Jade finally stepped back. 6 months. We agreed, we did, so 3 more months, 3 more months, she left. David leaned against the door after it closed. Exhaling hard, feeling his heart hammering against his ribs. Oliver made a sound in his sleep. David checked on him, smoothed his hair, whispered promises he intended to keep. 3 weeks later, David took Jade to the cemetery. They brought flowers and coffee, sat on the grass beside Emma's headstone while the city hummed around them, indifferent to grief. Do you think she'd be okay with this? David asked, staring at the dates carved in marble. With us? Jade took a sip of coffee, considering. She told me once that if anything ever happened to her, she wanted you to be happy. She was worried you'd become a hermit, drowning in guilt. I have been drowning, I know. Jade took his hand. Laced their fingers together. But you're also swimming. And that's enough. They sat in silence, honoring Emma while carefully building something new in the space her absence had created. The sun moved across the sky. Cars passed. Life continued its relentless forward march. She also said, Jade added quietly, that she hoped if you moved on, it would be with someone who understood you. Someone who wouldn't try to change you. A pause. She looked right at me when she said it. David turned to face her. She said that, Christmas, 2 years ago. She was drunk on eggnog. I thought she was rambling. But now, Jade squeezed his hand. Now I think she was giving us permission. They stayed until the coffee went cold, then walked back to David's car, still holding hands, Emma's blessing settling over them like light through clouds. 6 months to the day after the country club confrontation, David picked up Jade in his ancient Honda. She was wearing jeans and a thrift store flannel. He wore his threadbare blazer. They looked like they'd coordinated without trying, which made them both laugh. The taco truck was in a parking lot near the industrial district, surrounded by warehouses and freight containers. They ordered 6 tacos and 2 sodas. The total came to $14. They split it exactly, so, Jade said, sitting across from him at a wobbly picnic table. Full disclosure before this goes any further. I make $42,000 a year. I have $38,000 in student loans. My car has 180,000 miles and needs a new transmission. I've never been to Europe. I shop exclusively at thrift stores and discount groceries. My idea of a fancy night out is Olive Garden with a coupon, David grinned. Full disclosure back. I'm about to sell my remaining stake in Budget Zen for $12 million. I'm giving $10 million to charity. I'm planning to retire from development and teach coding to underprivileged kids full-time. I'll keep living on about $50,000 a year. I have no interest in luxury, travel, or material upgrades. My idea of a fancy night out is this taco truck. Jade stared at him. That's really hot, is it? Stupidly hot. Like, I might need a minute. They laughed, really laughed, the kind of laughter that felt like medicine. Around them, the parking lot hummed with evening traffic, the smell of carne asada hanging in the air, the city lights beginning to flicker on as dusk approached. Emma told me something else, Jade said, her voice dropping. At that Christmas when she was drunk, yeah, she said if she died and you moved on, she hoped it would be with someone who actually got you. Someone who wouldn't try to change you. Jade reached across the table, took his hand. And then she looked right at me and said, "Someone like you, Jade." David's breath caught. She said that, she said that. I thought she was just drunk rambling. But now, Jade squeezed his fingers. Now I think she knew. Somehow she knew. David stood, pulled Jade up with him. They were standing in a parking lot with grease-stained napkins blowing around their feet, the smell of cooking meat and exhaust fumes mixing in the air. Nothing romantic about any of it. This is probably the least romantic setting for a first kiss, David said. I know. It's perfect. He kissed her. Soft and tentative, asking permission with every second. She kissed back, sure and steady, answering with certainty. When they broke apart, both their eyes were wet. I loved her, David whispered. I know. And I think I'm falling for you. I know that too. Is that okay? Jade cupped his face with both hands. David. You spent 3 years secretly funding my mother's life because Emma asked you to. You live like a monk despite being a millionaire. You're raising your son to value people over things. You're the most okay thing that's ever happened to me. They kissed again, longer this time, deeper. The taco truck guy wolf whistled. They laughed against each other's mouths, tasting salt and lime and possibility. 2 weeks later, David hosted dinner at his apartment. Cramped but cozy, the table barely big enough for 5. He invited Marcus, Jade, Patricia, and Oliver. Patricia arrived with a casserole that was slightly burned but made with visible effort. She wore Target clothes and no makeup, her face bare and real. I'm nervous, she admitted at the door. Me too, David said. Come in. They ate around the thrift store table, passing dishes, making conversation that felt almost normal. Patricia played with Oliver between bites, genuinely engaged. She asked Jade about her students. She thanked Marcus for his patience during the legal proceedings. The room felt warm despite the cheap furniture and cramped quarters. After dinner, Patricia pulled David aside while Jade cleared plates. I need to tell you something, she said. I'd been in therapy. Working through a lot. She took a shaky breath. I was terrified of being poor again. My family was broke when I was young. We lived in a trailer park. I won Miss Georgia to escape. I married Emma's father for money. When he left, I panicked. I built this whole persona to convince myself I'd made it. David listened without interrupting. And then you came along, Patricia continued, living simply by choice, and it was like you were mocking everything I'd clawed my way toward. But you weren't mocking me. You were just being you. And I hated you for it because it showed me how hollow my life was. I didn't know about the trailer park. I never told anyone. Not even Emma. I was ashamed. Patricia's voice cracked. I'm sorry. For the invoice, for trying to take Oliver, for every snide comment. I'm sorry for not seeing what Emma saw in you. You're a good man. Better than any man I've known. David hugged her. She stiffened, then softened, hugging back with the desperation of someone learning how to be human again. You're still on probation, David said. I know. I'm working on it. Time passed in golden snapshots. Patricia posted apartment tours and budgeting tips, building a following based on transformation instead of aspiration. David launched his coding program, teaching at-risk youth twice a week. Jade volunteered, helping with literacy components. Their teaching styles complementing each other perfectly. Oliver turned 2 at a public park with dollar store balloons and homemade cake. Patricia came, along with Marcus and several of David's students. No book club. No country club. Just real people sharing real joy. David and Jade moved in together when Oliver was 2.5, finding a modest 2-bedroom in a good school district. They had family dinners 3 times a week. Patricia came to half, slowly rebuilding trust through consistency instead of grand gestures. One afternoon while unpacking, Jade found Emma's journal. She opened it carefully, reading entries that felt like eavesdropping on the past. One entry, dated 6 months before Emma died, made her stop breathing. I wish I was more like David. He's so content with enough. I keep chasing more. More money, more approval, more validation from Mom. I'm exhausted. Tonight he told me he loved me exactly as I am. I cried. I don't think anyone's ever said that to me before. If anything ever happens to me, I hope he finds someone who loves him the way he loved me. Wholly, simply, without conditions. Maybe Jade. She's the only other person I know who might understand him, Jade showed David. They both cried, then framed the page and hung it in Oliver's room. Emma's blessing, preserved in her own handwriting, watching over them all.